Hey everyone, this is DJ Meyer, and in this video I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to sidechain your reverb tails here in Ableton Live. Now the reason you'd want to do this is sometimes you have a really nice, beautiful reverb tail you want to stand out, but you don't want it fighting with the original or dry element in your track. So in my case, I'm going to be using a vocal, and what we're going to be doing is going from this sound.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
To this.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
So the difference is when the vocal is playing, it's not fighting with the reverb tail, but when the vocal's not playing, then the reverb tail comes up. So what we're going to do is we're going to sidechain the reverb tail. So when the vocal's playing, the reverb will duck down, and then when the vocal's done, the dry vocal's done, the reverb tail will come back up and you get that nice wash over. So the way to do this is, right now the reverb that I'm using for this is this Arts Acoustic reverb. So this is the, in context, this is what it sounds like.
Somebody close the door from the inside. Leaving me empty.
And just the vocal.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
So I like that reverb tail at the end of the phrase, but it's pushing the main vocal back too much in the mix. So what I'm going to do, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your reverb and you're going to hit Command G on Mac or Control G on Windows to create a group for it. Now this is going to create an audio effect chain around this reverb. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up this audio effect rack, and what we want to do is have a dry and a wet. Now, chances are if you have your reverb in the signal path like this in the chain, you're going to have the dry and the wet coming through, or a dry wet knob that's set on some percent. So what's really important is we want this to be the wet reverb signal. So all I need to do with this is take my reverb plugin that's in this chain and turn it down to completely wet. So I'm turning the dry all the way down. Now, if I was to play this, what's going on is the audio would be just going through the wet reverb, which is not what I want. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a parallel chain that's just the dry signal. And one easy way to do this is to click on the chain that you have, and I'm going to hit Command D on Mac. You can also use Control D on Windows, and it's going to create a parallel chain. And for this one, I want the second one to just be the dry signal. So on this, I'm going to go ahead and delete this plugin. So basically what you have is you have the dry signal coming through and you have the wet signal. So we haven't done any sidechain yet. This is just setting up the dry-wet combination. And what can help is to rename this. I'm going to call this dry and I'm going to call this wet. And maybe I will just give this a color. Yeah, that's fine. So now if I listen to this, notice how what's going on is the signal's coming through, the vocal's coming through. When it gets to here, it splits into these two different chains. The wet signal goes through just the reverb, which is wet, and then the dry signal, it comes through and just comes over here, and then it gets added here at the end. You don't see that, but that's what's going on. It's splitting the signal, and it's running through both. So let's take a listen to what we have now.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
So what we've done is split the signal, but now what we need to do is add a compressor to the wet. And this is the nice thing, right? When we add a compressor to the wet, we would only be ducking the wet reverb tail and signal. We're not going to be ducking the dry at all. So the dry is just going to go through completely unscathed, whereas the wet, this is where we're going to go ahead and add a compressor. Let me go ahead and open up the browser, and I'm just going to find the Ableton compressor, and I'm just going to drag it in here. Now, what I need to do is I want to sidechain this from the dry vocal itself. So what I'm going to do is open this, and I'm going to click Sidechain. So click the Sidechain button, and the audio input, I need to just find basically this track's input, which is this one. And what I need to do is basically do pre-effects, which basically means it's going to get this signal before it runs through this effect chain, like this. And now what I can do when I adjust this threshold, it will trigger this compressor to duck down the volume of the reverb when this comes in. So let's see what we can do with this.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
And sometimes you can add maybe a little bit more ratio.
Somebody close the door from the inside, leaving me empty, leaving me empty.
So notice what's going on. This orange line is the gain reduction. So when the vocal is coming in, when the dry vocal is coming in, it's ducking the reverb tail. And then when the vocal is done, it's not doing any gain reduction. So it's only lowering the volume of the reverb when the two would be fighting, when it's playing. Now, one thing that can be helpful is to add this EQ here, because I don't want the low end of this vocal triggering it. One of the problems is when it's not going through any of these effects, there's no EQ on the vocal. So I don't want that super low end triggering the compressor at all. So let's see if we can change this.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
And let's hear it without the compressor.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
So notice all that reverb that's there, and then when I turn the compressor on,
somebody close the door from the inside.
now you could make this really, really emphasized by just turning it all the way down.
Somebody close the door from the inside.
But you're probably not going to want to do that. So once again, I find that you still want the reverb there, but you just don't want it that much when they're both playing.
Somebody close the door from the inside. Somebody close the door from the inside. Leaving me empty, leaving me empty.
And that's how you can do it. We can just rename this rack sidechain reverb. Again, you can use this with any reverb plugin. You can do this with any plugin chain that you want. It's just often I do it with reverb. So the main thing is splitting it and having it here. Now, why would you want to do this as opposed to just putting a compressor on the vocal and reverb after the fact, which will duck them both down? Well, the problem with doing that is you're going to get the vocal plus the reverb, and then the compressor is going to duck both of them down. So it is going to keep the level constant, but it's not going to keep the vocal up front in the mix because it's lowering both the reverb and the vocal together. Whereas when you do it this way, what's going on is when the vocal is playing, the reverb ducks down, and then when the vocal isn't playing, the other ducks down. So rather than bringing them both down, it kind of puts precedence to the vocal and keeps that vocal more forward in the mix, which is what I want to do in this case. So that's why I recommend using this sidechain effect. I also use this for leads because sometimes, again, putting a compressor on the leads and reverb is going to lower the volume of the dry leads, which can make things muddy, which can push it back. So any of the things you want front and center in the mix, it makes sense to sidechain the reverb tail or the effects tail to the actual dry signal to keep that front and center. So it really has to do with the philosophy and what you want prominent in your mix. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, give it a like, subscribe. I got a lot of other videos coming and some other courses planned as well. So I'll see you in the next video.